The thought of making a webcomic can be daunting. And if you're just starting out or have dabbled in creating one yourself, you may be wondering, do I have time to make a webcomic? Or, well, how long does it actually take to make a webcomic? I'll share with you all the data I tracked during the creation process for an episode of my own webcomic, which I will link in the description if you want to check it out. Okay, now let's jump right into it. First things first, let's break down the process to make one episode of about 40 panels, which is more or less the length of an average Webtoons original. First, I write the idea for the story. Then I draw a mini rough version so it's easy to rearrange the parts. Then I do another rough version, but at actual size. Then I place all the dialogue, make the panel borders, and then finally draw the actual final line art. After that, I add basic colors, and then the speech bubbles and sound effects, then the shadows and lighting, and for that extra oomph, I color some of the line art. Lastly, I add any effect like blurs or glares, and finally, any remaining visual polish. I do each of these steps in one pass to avoid my archenemy, the bane of all productivity, context switching. I haven't really seen too many other creators do it this way. Usually they'll do one panel to completion and then keep going, or do the panels they feel like here and there, but comment below with what your process is. I'm really interested to hear the different methods people have. During the course of one episode, I logged the duration every time that I worked on my webcomic, and I noted the step that I was at in my 12-step process. The following is how many hours each step took. With a full-time job, it takes me about a month to complete an episode, and now I see why. Something that's interesting to note about the data. The line work step, then the flats, and then the shading takes the longest, which is very interesting because those are the steps I see most often outsourced to an assistant. Personally, the coloring part of my comic is very straightforward, so that would probably be the biggest time saver to delegate if I ever want to pay someone to do that, which is good to know. The line work is by far the longest step, and is also the step where I feel the actual uniqueness of the comic gets manifested. So it'd be really hard to outsource that piece. However, I've seen some artists do the faces and general pose and try to hire someone to do the actual line work for the rest of the panel. But that's the level of control I feel most artists are not ready to give up yet. And it also might not be possible for certain art styles. Also, I've seen some artists use asset sheets to speed it all up, but here's a Webtoon creator video where they discuss that. And here's the same graph as before, but now you can see the individual sessions per step in each column. Okay, now onto some caveats and things that I purposefully left out of my previous analysis. When I was first starting to make my webcomic, I wasn't tracking the time that I was spending, but it probably took around double the time to make one episode. So don't be discouraged if it takes a lot longer at first. There was also a lot of time spent on researching and learning various things about making comics and art, but that's where the growth happens. I also have made template Photoshop files that have all my layers for the various steps of my process, and some asset sheets for backgrounds or effects that I like to reuse, most of which I've made myself over the course of making my comic and then decided to store for later reuse. Bubbles and panels and things like that. It just helps to get started quicker with a new episode. Also, being a software engineer by day, at some point I coded up an auto-slicing extension to Photoshop, which cuts my working file into pages for Webtoon. It also generates a mobile preview of how it will look on Webtoon right then and there, which has saved me tons of time. Doing that manually and uploading on Webtoons to see it was like 20 minutes, and this is like 15 seconds. I'll put a link to the code in the description if you're interested in that project or you want to use it yourself. I think Clip Studio Paint might have a feature these days that does something similar, but I made it first, just saying. As a side note, I use Blender and sometimes SketchUp for some of the backgrounds. All right, y'all, we're at the conclusion, so here are my tips for being the most efficient webcomic creator possible. Number 1. Do things in passes to avoid context switching. Number 2. Accumulate and create asset sheets and templates for reuse. Number 3, and this one is mostly just life advice, but I learned it over the course of this webcomic creating journey. You should focus on a goal that you can actually control. You can't control how many views or subs or if people will comment, but you can control if you will improve your skills, art, or story. So set the goal as something in terms of your own thoughts and feelings. When you're sitting there not getting the views or subs you hope for, it's pretty rough. But then at least you can be like, my goal was to improve on my art, regardless if people read this thing. Also, another thing, sometimes you may feel pressure to finish the episode and just draw the whole thing as fast as possible, which sidelines learning and improvement. It's important to take those moments and actually choose to learn and get better at drawing a particular thing. For me, it was sand one time in a certain episode. Find a few tutorials and make them yourself. It can be surprising how fast it actually takes to learn something new, and it's way more fulfilling when you actually gain skills as an artist. And better for you long-term too. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening, and I hope you got something out of this. Feel free to say hi or post a question in the comments. If you like sci-fi, comedy, or epic adventures, check out my comic on Webtoon, Earthling Endocolors. I'll leave the link in the description. Ari Mo, logging out.